Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Yud Aleph, Yevamos 11, but we're going to start in the middle of Yud Hamabeis, where the Gemara tells us Itmar. We learned so somebody does chalitza with their Yevama. Now by halacha, once you do the chalitza, once you render the marriage apart, then with your Yevama, you're not allowed to be with her forever, and you're not allowed to marry her or any of the co-wives. But but then you went back and you married her. You weren't supposed to, but you went back and you remarried her. So what's the law under those circumstances? So about this, there's a dispute between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish says, under those circumstances, Amar Reish Lakish, who ein chayav al chalutza kares? Who ein chayav al chalutza kares? Who ain't chayav al chalutza kares? He, the person himself, the man who did the chalutza with his brother's widow, he is no longer in a relationship with her where there's a punishment of kares. However, but the other brothers chayavin al chalutza kares. The other brothers, they will get kares if they're with her. The other brothers will get kares. The Gemara is going to explain why. And not only are they getting kares with her, but also al tzara. Also with the co-wives, bein hu bein and also with the co-wives, but with respect to the co-wife, so in short, Reish Lakish is saying the man who did the chalitza, or in the middle of 10b, the man who did the chalitza, he doesn't have a kares relationship with the widow of this woman, with the widow of his brother anymore. But with the co-wife and with all the brothers, he does have. They do have a kares relationship. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, "Bein hu vein ha'achem einan chayavin lo chalutza kares v'lo atzara kares." So whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, whether with respect to him or whether with respect to the brothers, they're not going to be obligated for the chalutza kares or for the tzaris kares. So meaning to say, Rabbi Yochanan says nobody has kares. Not for sure, not the person who does the chalitza themselves, but neither anybody else now with them or with respect to their co-wives. My time at the Reish Lakish. What's the reason why Reish Lakish says that they all get kares except for the person who actually did the chalitza? What's the reasoning for Reish Lakish? Amakra, the verse says, it says in the verse, if the person who will not build, will not build the house of his brother. It means it's a prohibition. Kivan Shalobana, once he didn't do the yibum with his widow, with his brother's widow, Shuv lo yivneh. He's never allowed to do the yibum or to marry her again. However, who does this prohibition apply to? Iu dekai below yivneh. According with respect to him, for whom it applies, this prohibition, he can no longer build it. But with respect to his brothers, with respect to all the brothers, they retain the initial prohibition. And what's the initial prohibition? The initial prohibition is the prohibition of kares. And so that's what iu the kai. So that's iu who the kai below yivneh. Achad kedekai kaimi. And then where do we say this prohibition applies? Only with respect to the, where do we say with the respect of lo yivna apply? Only to that woman herself for whom the chalitza happened. Allah dido dekai below yivna hatzara, but with respect to the co-wives, kaimi. That's also going to retain the existing prohibition of kares. So that's what Reish Lakish says, comes along Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I disagree. There is no kares prohibition here whatsoever. Rabbi Yochanan says, is it possible to make kara that initially speaking, how is it possible that initially speaking, if you wanted to, any one of the brothers could have done chalitza with this woman, and if this one wanted, he could have done the chalitza. The hashta kaya the kares, and now since they all had the possibility of doing chalitza with her, and thereby having just a regular prohibition, now you want to say they all get kares. So we just say iu shlichusa the achim ka'avid, I shlichusa the tzara ka'avid. So we say she iu with respect to the other brothers. He is really just the proxy. He's the agent of all the other brothers. So just like he's a prohibition, all the other brothers are also just a regular prohibition, not kares. Whereas she, shlichusa, ditzaraka abda. She is just a proxy of all the other co-wives. And so therefore, just like she is a regular prohibition, also the co-wives are a regular prohibition. So that's a dispute between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says everybody's kares except for the one who actually did the chalitza to remarry her. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, everybody's just a regular prohibition to remarry this wife. So Rabbi Yochanan challenges Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. What does it say? It says a chalitzli of him. So that somebody does chalitza with his yevama, he does chalitza with his brother's widow, v'chazar v'kacha, and then he goes back and remarries her. That's the case we're talking about. Umeis, and now he dies. Sricha chalitza min ha'achin. She requires chalitza from the other brothers. Now, this makes sense as Rabbi Yochanan according to me, because I say it's a regular prohibition, and since it's just a regular prohibition, that's why you have to do chalitza in this circumstance. But you say it's a kares prohibition, and we have a principle that if somebody tries to quote unquote get married to a situation where it's a kares, the marriage is not valid, and you wouldn't require chalitza or yibum in that circumstance. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. It's a proof against Reish Lakish. Why is it a regular prohibition? That's why we say it's chalitza from the brothers. That's because it's a regular prohibition, so it's a regular marriage. So that's why you require chalitza. But according to you, who say it's a kares penalty, why is chalitza required? Why is it required to do chalitza under those circumstances? It's a kares penalty. There should be nothing. And so therefore it doesn't disprove that it's a regular lav and not chalitza and not kares from the fact that we require chalitza. So under those circumstances, Reish Lakish responds to Rabbi Yochanan, yeah, you think that's a good question, but that same brisa that you cited, what does the seifa of that brisa say? And according to you, Ema seifa, what does the concluding clause say? Amar echam and acham, that if one of the brothers stood up, and the kitsha, meaning to say that who is the one who betrothed this woman? Not the one who did the chalitza with her, but a different one of the brothers stood up and did chalitza with her. That under those circumstances, what do the brises say? Ein lo lav klum. He does nothing with her, meaning to say the kedushin is not tofis, or it's not a marriage. Well, the kedushin is not tofis, or there's no marriage there, and so therefore he separates from her without requiring a get. Meaning to say, brother Shimon does chalitza, Reuven dies. Shimon does chalitza with Reuven's wife Rachel. Levi comes along. He's not allowed to be with her anymore. He's the brother. He's not allowed to be with her anymore. But he does kiddushin. So the end of this price, it says there's no kiddushin whatsoever, and therefore they separate that marriage without even a divorce. We don't recognize it. It's like marrying a table. It's not valid. You're not married to a table. His marrying her is not valid whatsoever. So says Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, but that only makes sense to me because I say he's not allowed to be with her because it's kares, but you say it's a regular prohibition. If it's just a regular prohibition, why do we say the marriage is not valid? It's a valid marriage, but it's just a regular prohibition. It's not kares. Yeah, they're not allowed to do it, but it is a valid marriage. Amar Rav Sheshes. Seifa asan or Rabbi Akiva. So, by the way, I wonder what the law would be in American law. If somebody marries somebody, they're not allowed to. Let's say, person you're not allowed to by American law. Let's say maybe in some states you have to be 17 and you get married and you marry at 16. Is it not binding? That's really the question that's here. I mean, is the marriage not recognized by the state if you did the marriage against the law? So here there's a prohibition, but they went ahead and got married. So why do we say it's not a marriage if it's a regular prohibition, like you, Rabbi Yochanan? So Reish Lakish says this is a question against Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says, Rav Sheshes, I'll give you the answer. Why in the concluding clause do we say it's not a valid marriage? Because Seifa also Rabbi Akiva, because the concluding clause goes even according to the position of Rabbi Akiva, who says in kiddushin tovsim b'chayv elav. And Rabbi Akiva's position was that the kiddushin that we have been working under the assumption of like the Rabbanan, who say that when it's a prohibition of kares, the marriage is not binding. When it's a prohibition, a regular prohibition, the marriage is binding. But actually, says Rav Sheshes, the end of the brisa goes according to Rabbi Akiva, who says in kiddushin tovsim b'chayv elav, and that even if it's just a regular prohibition, there's no kiddushin, the marriage is not valid. The Gemara says we don't accept that. Why? But listening with different Rabbi Akiva in Rolavkom. If that's the case, you should have said according to Rabbi Akiva, there is no marriage, but not according to everybody. You made it sound like this is the regular position. Gemara says, you're right, Kasha. That is indeed a difficulty with that approach. So we have a problem that the first part of the brisa seems to be saying a question on Reish Lakish, because the first part of the brisa says that all the other brothers do chalitza, which is against Rabbi Yochanan, because against Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish says it's kares for all the other brothers, and therefore there should be no chalitza. Whereas the second clause is a problem on Rabbi Yochanan, because the second clause says if one of the other brothers stands up and betroths her, he separates with in-law of klum, that there's no divorce needed, which is a problem because according to Rabbi Yochanan, you would require a divorce under those circumstances. So we have the first part contradicting the second part. So it comes along the Gemara on the top of 11a. Rav Ashi Savra Reish Lakish, Umetaris like Rabbi Shimon. Rav Ashi says, I follow Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says all the other brothers is a concern of chayve krisus with all the other brothers. Umetaris like Rabbi Shimon, and he says, and I'm going to explain it like Rabbi Shimon, and we'll see what that means in a moment. Ravina Savra like Rabbi Yochanan. Ravina says like Rabbi Yochanan. Ravina holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Umetaris k'Rabbanan, and he explains it like the Rabbanan. We'll see what this means. Rav Ashi Savra like Reish Lakish. Rav Ashi holds like Reish Lakish. Umetaris like Rabbi Shimon. Rav Ashi says this is like Reish Lakish, who says that that with all the other brothers it's called a chayve krisus. But so if that's the case, why do we say that if one of them goes and marries her after Shimon dies? Why do we say that they have to do chalitza? He says because the mitaris like Rabbi Shimon. He says I'm going to explain it like Rabbi Shimon. Remember, what was the position of Rabbi Shimon, which we saw before? Rabbi Shimon says that if there are two brothers and first brother dies and the second brother, let's say Reuven dies, and Shimon's left to do yibum or chalitza with Reuven's widow, but then if after Reuven does yibum with Shimon's or chalitza with after Shimon does yibum or chalitza with Reuven's widow, then Levi is born. So then when Shimon dies, the rabbis say Levi does nothing with Shimon's widow because he's what's called a brother who was born after the other brother died. But Rabbi Shimon says no. In that case, he would require chalitza. That Levi would do chalitza with Shimon's widow, and so that's how Rav Ashi is going to explain our brayse. He says you read the brayse as follows: somebody does chalitza with their yevama, and then chazar v'kacha, and then he goes out and marries her after he does a chalitza ceremony. Tzricha chalitza min ha'achin. Then she's going to require chalitza from the other brothers. Man achin. Who are these other brothers? Achin hayulodim. These are the brothers who are born after Shimon already did chalitza with her. And who is this like? Rabbi Shimon. This is like Rabbi Shimon, who requires chalitza with the brother who's born after that. And Amar echad mina anoadim v'kitcha. Let's say one of the brothers who was born prior to Reuven dying, meaning to say one of the existing brothers, if he got up and if he did betrothal with this woman, ain't lo of klum, then there's nothing. Why? Because that's a kares relationship, and so they get divorced. They don't even need a divorce. Come on, who is that like? Reish Lakish. That's like the position of Reish Lakish, who says it's a kares relationship. Whereas Ravina Savra like Rabbi Yochanan. Ravina says this whole brisa is like Rabbi Yochanan. The mitaratz la'aliba de Rabbanan. He explains like the rabbis who say that a brother is born after the fact is going to not do yibum or chalitza. It was a kares penalty. So how does he explain it like Rabbi Yochanan? He says as follows: hacholitz liyavimto, like Rabbi Yochanan, who says that once you do chalitza, if you remarry or all the other brothers have a lav relationship, a regular prohibition. He says somebody does chalitza with their yevama v'chazar v'kitcha, and then he goes back and marries her. Tzricha chalitza minachan. Then the other brothers, when he dies, they do chalitza with her. Why? Manachan. Who are these other brothers? Achan anoladim. These are brothers who even if they were the brothers who were alive when he married in the first place, and therefore they have to do chalitza because they were alive at that time. So come on, Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yochanan, who says it's just a regular prohibition. But Amar Echam and Yuladim, but let's say one of the brothers who wasn't alive at that time, it was born after the time after Reuven died, his brother was born. That was the one who was born after the time. If one of them stood up, the kitcha and he betrothed her in law klum, then you don't do anything. There's no yibum or chalitza. Why? That's like the Rabbanan who argue with Rabbi Shimon, who say that in such a situation there's no yibum or chalitza. So the Gemara says Inmar, but let's analyze this. Hava Yevama, that one who does Yibum, and then, so what the law is that once somebody does Yibum with a woman, all the co-wives and are prohibited to all of his brothers because they're like the prohibition of the Eishes Ach, of the wife of a brother, and Shalom b'makom mitzvah. It's not a place of mitzvah, so they become prohibited to be with her. But let's say even after you do Yibum, one of the other brother comes and decides to have a relationship with the co-wives. It's not allowed. So what's the law there? Pligi ba Ravacha v'Ravina. It's a dispute between Ravacha and Ravina. Chad amar b'kares. One says, well, that relationship of the brothers with the co-wife is kares. The Chad amar ba'aseh, and the one who says, and the other one says it's a positive prohibition, meaning it's a lava b'mikal. Say you're not allowed, you have to do this, but you didn't do this, you're in violation of the prohibition. So man da amar, the one who says the kares, the one who says it's kares, that's like the position of Reish Lakish. Man da amar ba'aseh, and the one who says it's like an aseh, that's like Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yehuda amar Rav. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Sarah Sota Asura. So now if we have the co-wife of a Sota, she's going to be prohibited. Then what's a Sota here? A Sota here is a woman who we have witnesses that she was adulterous, but the husband did not get around to divorcing her yet. He's supposed to divorce her, but he didn't get around to divorcing her. So that such a woman is going to be prohibited you're not allowed to be with her co-wives, and that's based upon the idea that you're not allowed to do Yibum or Chalitza with this woman who is a Sota. So it's also with the co-wives. Why, says Rav? Tumah ksiva. It says about the Sota, she is called Tumah, which says she has defiled by being adulterous. And so therefore, she's like the same word that appears like the prohibited sexual relationships. And so therefore, for that reason, since it says this word Tumah by her, she's like the Arias, and just like in Ereva, there is no Yibum or Chalitza with her or with her co-wife, so too with the Sota, with this adulterous woman. So that's the position of Rav. So Masav Rav Chisda challenges this. It says we're talking about a hold on one second. So Massive Rav Chisda challenges from a following principle. What's the following principle? The principle is as follows: that if there's a woman who she had one witness come and tell us that her husband died, and since this one woman comes along and this one witness comes along and tells her that her husband has died, then under those circumstances, we're going to say that the rabbis allowed her to remarry, but only because we thought that she investigated the matter thoroughly and realized that it was really a valid death. So under those circumstances, where we investigated the matter thoroughly and realized it was a valid death, so therefore we're going to allow her to remarry. But if after she remarries, then the first husband reappears. So therefore, since the first husband has reappeared, we're going to say that under those circumstances, biblically speaking, she's allowed to return to her first husband, but rabbinically, we require her to leave both the first husband and the second husband who she remarried. So the Gemara says, and now here we introduce the question on our teaching of Rav, who says the co-wife of the Sota is prohibited. So comes along Rabbi Chisda and Rabbi Shimon. He says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, biaso chalitza sa me'achav shal rishon poteres sarasa. That Rabbi Shimon says that if this second person comes back, and the first husband comes back, and then he dies, and so then the surviving brother does Yibum or Chalitza with the first wife, with the co-wives, or with the widow, Chalitza me'achav shel rishon poteres sarasa. So if somebody comes back, after he comes back, one of the brothers, he dies, one of the brothers does Yibum or Chalitza with her co-wife is now exempt and can remarry. So we see from here that there is Yibum or Chalitza because we're understanding that this woman who was with two men is going to be considered adulterous. So therefore, nevertheless, we're still going to consider her to be. We're still going to be considering her to be adulterous. And so therefore, why are we saying there's Yibum or Chalitza under these circumstances? If she's adulterous, we had just said, according to Rav's position, that the co-wife of the adulterous woman there's not going to be Yibum or Chalitza. Why in this case do we say that there is Yibum or Chalitza? So Amar Charav, So Rav says, what kind of question is this? Aminu cha'ana sota diaraisa. I'm talking to you about a woman who was actually adulterous. There's a sota diaraisa. We know for a fact that there were witnesses, and biblically speaking, he's not allowed to be with her because it's a sota diaraisa. And you're telling me about the case where the rabbi says she's adulterous. The rabbi says she can't return to her first husband. She's really not adulterous. That's why Yibum or Chalitza with her exempts the co-wife. The Gemara says, the Ka'ari law, my Ka'ari, that's such a strong point you're making. Well, if that's the case, why do the rabbis even bring it up? What was their Havamim? Of course, one is biblical and one is rabbinic. Why would we even think it's the same situation? The Gemara says, no, because Kasavar, the rabbis are the position, called the Tikkun Rabbanan, the rabbis are the position, yeah, one is rabbinic and one is biblical, but whatever the rabbis instituted, they did it on the basis of biblical law. So just like basically, we were thinking biblically, there would be no Yibum or Chalitza, we also might have thought rabbinically speaking, the other wives would not be exempt from chalitza or yibum on the basis of that. So Masav Rav Ashi gives another question to challenge Rav's position. Again, Rav said that the tzara sota, the co-wife of the sota, is prohibited. So Rav Ashi challenges, says Nichnasa imo aseter. It says, let's say we've been talking about a woman who's a sota who there were actual witnesses to the adultery, but there's a different possibility. Let's say she entered into the room with him in secret, meaning to say we don't have evidence that they were adulterous, but the husband had warned her that you're not allowed to be secluded with this man. And she went and she was secluded with him. And she was there with him the amount of time in order to sin. She's not allowed to return to her husband because he warned her you can't do that. And you're not allowed to eat with the truma. The imay said under those circumstances, if the husband does, then under those circumstances, she does do chalitza. She doesn't do yibum. Rashi says the Gemara and Sota explains why, but she does do chalitza. Where under those circumstances, whereas Rav says that the co-wife of a sota, the co-wife of an adulterous woman, is where we said that there's no yibum or chalitza, and here we're saying that the co-wife of this woman who was in violation, who's secluded, does require chalitza. So and also she requires chalitza. So the Gemara says, Rav says two cases are totally different. I said to you sota vadai. I said about a woman who was for sure adulterous that her co-wife is also exempt from yibum or chalitza. As sota safek, and you're talking to me about a woman who was a sota safek, this woman who weren't sure if she was a sota, meaning to say that she was secluded, but we don't know for sure she was adulterous, and that's why we require chalitza on her. So we're saying, what's the reason why the woman who's a sota for sure, like we have witnesses, she was adulterous? Why do we say that her co-wife doesn't get yibum or chalitza? Explains the Gemara on top of 11, 3 lines at a time. Because it says about this woman, the sota woman, that she is tameh, she is defiled. And so if that's the case, if that's the reason why her co-wife is exempt from a chalitza, safek nami, sota safek nami tumaksiva by a woman who we're not sure if she's a sota, meaning to say she was just secluded. We also know it says the word tuma, the Tanya, as we have in the Brisa. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur Omer Mishum Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Hamachzir Gushaso Menanisun, somebody who is married, divorced his wife. Then, if she got fully married, which is called nisuin, there's 2 stages of marriage, and nisuin is the second stage. That under those circumstances, asura, he's not going to be allowed to remarry this woman. But minai rusim, but if she only did the betrothal, then mutaris. Then she says she's allowed. Mishum shenemar, because the verse states achrei asher hutama, because the verse says that you're not allowed to remarry her once she was defiled by being with another man. And so therefore, that's what the word hutama means, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur. But according to the Chachamim, they say achazu v'achazu asura, that with respect to both, whether she was fully married or just betrothed, she's not allowed to return to her first husband. And if that's the case, what do the Chachamim do with the words hutama? That comes to include who is she not allowed to be with anymore. Or Rabbo Sota Shenister. I come to include a woman who was a Sota, she was just secluded, but we don't know for sure she was adulterous. So therefore, we see from here that the words that this woman was secluded, it says the word Tuma, and we should say from here on that basis that she's also not allowed to be with the Yibum and Chalitza should be exempt from her and from her co-wives the same way. Gemara says, no, what does it mean, Nistara Nivala? It means that she actually had relations. So if that's the case, my Karle Nistara, why does it just say she was secluded? Where it says Lishna Ma'ayanaka, the Torah is speaking in a fine language. It doesn't want to say she actually was adulterous. It speaks in a fine way. Where it says, what are you talking about? Nivala Tuma Behedjik Sibe. It already says the word Tuma by a woman who was actually adulterous. It says Vinistara, Vihi Nitma. So if that's the case, why do we require it? There it says Vinistara, and she was Nitma. So if that's the case, why does it say it here again? There it was just a positive violation. There we want to say there's also a negative violation to that a husband's not allowed to return to be with his wife after she was adulterous. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, who says that the first verse is referring to that you're not allowed to remarry your wife, even if only if she was fully married, but not if it was just betrothed to another man afterwards. So if that's the case, Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur lav sota weisle, he said, does he also say there's no prohibition by a sota? And yes, he said sota weisle, but if he was actually adulterous, then there's no biblical prohibition to return to her. My time. What's the reasoning? Because it still says she was his wife, so you're still allowed to be with her. There's no prohibition to be. So Rabbi Yehuda asked Rav Sheshes the following question: so one who returns, meaning to say he remarries his divorced wife, Misha Isis, after she fully married. Okay, so you're not allowed to be with her then, according to everybody. Umeis, and now he dies. So you weren't allowed to marry this woman, but you did. What about the co-wife now? Do you do chalitza or yibum with her? I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur. According to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, loti bailach. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, it's not a question. Why? Given that Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur tuma b'machzer gusha. So since he says this word tuma, which is the same word that appears by Araba, also appears by one who returns is machzer gusha, so that they remarry their divorced wife. So therefore, it's a rasa kamosa. So it's going to be prohibited. The co-wife is like her, and it's prohibited. And there's no yibum or chalitza. Maybe you want to say, well, it says toeva she is an abomination, which means he toeva ve'emba now toeva. That doesn't mean that. That doesn't mean, all that means is he toeva, but not her children. Her children are going to be allowed. If you want to say it means she's an abomination, but her co-wife is not, and therefore you need to do yibum or chalitza with the co-wife. No, it means he toeva ve'imba now toeva kahuna. It means she is prohibited, but her children are allowed to be with the kohanim, and hatzarasa toeva. But the co-wife would be a toeva, meaning to say, it seems to say that the co-wife you're not allowed to be with. What it's to say, he toeva means that her offspring are toeva, but the co-wife is anyway toeva because it says the word tuma. So therefore, there's no yibum chalitza with someone who's machzer grusha, so with their co-wife. But kiti bailach, so it's not even a question according to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur. So who's it a question according to whom? It's only a question on libada rabbanan. Because the Rabbanan, they say that the word Tuma, which is written by the Master Grusha, so the Rabbanan say, Tuma, Afagav, Ta'amar Rabbanan, Tuma Basoto Dechsiv, even though the rabbis say that the word Tuma there refers to a Soto woman, still we say, a Mikra Yotze Midi Pshuta. We say, still, technically speaking, the verse never leaves its literal meaning, and it applies also to a Master Grusha. So, or do we say, oh, Dilma Kimandi Akar Akar? Since we said it applies to a Soto woman, therefore, under those circumstances, since it applies to a sota woman, therefore we're going to say that it doesn't apply to the machzer gushaso, and so therefore you do yibum and chalitza with her. So the Gemara explains, alternative version, I'll leave it to Rabbanan Lo Tibayach. According to the rabbis, it's not a question. Even the Yakar, there's no, since it got uprooted, doesn't apply to a co-wife, to a Machzor Grishasa, and so therefore you would do Yibum or Chalitza with the co-wife. Kitibayach, Chalibu the Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur. It's only a question according to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur. What does it mean? My Afagav, what's the law? Afagav Dam Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur Tuma b'Machzor Grishasa. Even though Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur says that this word Tuma, which is like an erva, which would mean that there's no, which is written by Machzor Grishasa, which means you would think ideally that there's no Yibum or Chalitza with her, like in the year, but nevertheless, Mi'et Rachmana, the Torah also limits it. It says Toeva he, which means he Toeva, she is an abomination, Ve'in Terasa Toeva. But the co-wife is not the Toeva, and so therefore the co-wife is allowed to be with the Yavam. Oh, and there would be Yibum and Chalitza. Odilma he Toeva Ve'in Banea Toeva, or maybe it means she's the abomination, but not her children. But the tzarasa, but the co-wife is a toeva. So how do we answer this question? Amarei Tinisua. We have the Mishnah coming up. What does it say? Haisa achas kashera achas pesula. If one of these women was kashera and one of them was disqualified, imaya cholitz lepsula v'mayamiyab mukshera. He does chalitza with the disqualified wife and yibum with the kosher wife. So what does it mean, a kosher wife? My kshera, my pesula. What's a kosher and disqualified? If you want to say kshera means that she can marry any kohen, and psula alma, and disqualify means that she's disqualified to the whole world. That doesn't make sense. That she meaning to say she can't marry a kohen doesn't make sense. Since he can marry her, my nafko mina. Why do we care which one he does chalitz or yibum with? He can marry them. Elalav, it must be kshera lay. And psul psele means the one who was kosher to the husband who died, i.e., that it wasn't his divorced wife who he remarried, and psula disqualified means psule was his divorced wife who he remarried. What is this? The Machzor Grishasa. This is the divorced wife who he remarried, and it still states he does yibum with the kosher wife, and with the not, and therefore we do yibum with the co-wife of a Machzor Grishasa. The Gemara says, no, that's not what we're talking about. I'm kshera alma. It is a kosher to the whole world. And psula is psula alma. And meaning kosher to all Kohanim. And the other woman is disqualified to the Kohanim, meaning to say she was already divorced when he married her. With the Ka'amras, given to the Lidei Chazi, might not mean. So why do we care who he marries? So Mishum the Rav Yosef, this follows the teaching of Rav Yosef, who taught Rav Yosef, Kan Shana Rabbi, lo yishbo chodam meibor v'acherem tzrichem lahem. So you're not allowed to pour out the water. You shouldn't pour out your waters if others need it. Meaning to say, if you have a choice, if you're not going to do, if you have two wives who died, the man died and he had left behind two wives, if one was already divorced, that's the one you should do the chalitza with because she's already disqualified to the Kohen. So don't take water and pour it out. Don't ruin another woman from marrying a Kohen who's divorced. And so that's how the Gemara deals with it. All right, we'll pick this up again on Shabbos Kodesh, or actually we'll pick it up